I woke up on my son's wedding day to a muffled sound of crying coming from the bathroom. When I opened the door, I saw my wife kneeling on the floor, silent in a way that was terrifying. All around her were long strands of platinum hair cut and scattered everywhere. On the sink sat a hair clipper still tangled with hair. Next to it was a messy handwritten note. "Mom looks too old. I helped Mom look younger for the wedding video." In that moment, I understood something clearly. This was not a wedding. This was a performance. I'm telling this story not to get attention, but so the truth can be heard all the way through. If you're listening right now, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. As for me, that morning did not begin with blessings. It began with me kneeling beside my wife, on the cold bathroom floor, surrounded by pieces of her cut hair. I stood frozen for a few seconds. Then I knelt down beside Nancy. She wasn't crying out loud. Her hands were shaking as they rested on her smooth, bare head, as if she still couldn't believe what had just happened was real. That hair had been with her for more than 30 years. Since the days when we were poor. From early mornings when she rushed students across the street. From the day her mother passed away when she swore she would never cut her hair again, as a way to hold on to the last memory she had left. The bathroom floor was cold. Platinum strands of hair clung to my slippers, to my pajamas. I picked up the hair clipper. It was still warm. That's when I knew. This had just happened. Not an accident. Not a mistake. Nancy whispered very softly, as if afraid the room might shatter. "I'm sorry. Maybe I really am old." That sentence hurt me more than the sight in front of me. Not because of the hair that was gone, but because she blamed herself for someone else's cruelty. I placed my hand on her shoulder and felt the tension she was holding inside. I said nothing. If I had opened my mouth, I knew I wouldn't be able to control my voice. I looked around the room. Everything was too neat. The towels were folded carefully. The window was open at the usual angle. This didn't look like chaos after an incident. It looked planned. On the vanity besides the note, there was a phone lying face down. I turned it over. The screen lit up. The video recording app was still running. The live stream icon showed it had ended less than 10 minutes ago. I understood before I had time to think. Zoe didn't just shave my wife's hair. She recorded the whole thing. I checked quickly. In the list of connected devices, a small camera was still active. I followed the power cable hidden behind a box of towels. A tiny camera, placed at the exact angle to capture Nancy's face as she looked into the mirror. Not random, not impulsive. This was a script. Nancy looked at me, panic in her eyes as she saw the camera in my hand. "Franklin, they can't." I didn't answer. I removed the battery and slipped the camera into my pocket. Then I stood up and locked the bathroom door from the inside, as if that could make her a little safer. Outside the mansion, along Puget Sound, was slowly waking up. Staff moved quietly through the halls. The smell of fresh flowers filled the air. A perfect morning for a carefully staged wedding. I helped Nancy to her feet. I led her back to the bed and wrapped her in the thickest robe we had. "You don't need to go out right now," I said slowly. "Let me handle this." She nodded, but her hand stayed tightly wrapped around mine, as if letting go would make everything collapse again. I stepped into the hallway and closed the bedroom door behind me. When it shut, I heard her start to cry. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough for me to know this. Some wounds don't need blood to leave marks for a lifetime. I walked down the hallway toward the bride and groom's suite. Each step felt heavier than the last. The anger I felt earlier was gone. In its place was a familiar coldness. The same feeling I used to have facing critical design failures offshore, where one wrong decision could force an entire ship to turn back. I heard laughter coming from Jack's room, Zoe's voice sharp and clear. Jack's lower rushed. I stopped. Not out of hesitation, but because something inside me told me to. Through the slightly open door, I saw them looking at a phone screen. Zoe tilted her head, satisfied. Jack stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but some truths find you, even when you don't invite them. "It might be a bit much," Jack said quietly, "but if the clip goes viral, it'll be worth it." Zoe laughed. "Relax. Old people always forgive." I stood still, not because I was shocked, but because the line sounded too smooth, like they had talked about this before. I didn't listen any longer. I turned away before they noticed me. I didn't want a confrontation yet. For me, all the important pieces were already in place. When I returned to the bedroom, Nancy was calmer. She sat upright, hands resting on her lap. Her eyes were tired, but no longer panicked. "I'm okay," she said, even though I knew that wasn't true. I sat beside her. There were no more questions in my mind about why. The only thing left was what to do next. I knew that if I raised my voice now, if I ruined the ceremony in an emotional way, Nancy would be the one hurt all over again. Zoe wanted chaos. Jack needed money, and both of them believed I would stay silent, like I always had. They were used to me giving in, but this time I wasn't going to shout. I was going to close every door they believed had always been open. I left the bedroom once Nancy had drifted into an exhausted sleep. It wasn't deep. I knew that, but at least that room separated her for a moment from a morning that was moving forward as if nothing had happened. I closed the door so gently the hinges made no sound. Right now, silence mattered more than any promise. The hallway leading to the honeymoon suite was covered in thick carpet. Each step sank and rose, slowly matching the rhythm of my thoughts. I no longer felt the urge to confront anyone. What I needed was the full picture. Not just what happened to Nancy, but why my son could stay silent through all of it. The door to the suite was slightly open. I was about to walk past when Jack's voice stopped me on instinct. It was low-rushed. Not the voice he used with me. Not the one he used with his mother. "Don't worry," Jack said. "It's just a few uncomfortable minutes." Zoe replied without hesitation. "I need the numbers. The more controversial it is, the better the video performs. You know that." I stood still, not to listen in, but because my body stopped on its own like a ship caught in a sudden current. I heard paper rustling, then Jack let out a breath. "If we hit this mark," he said, "ad revenue and sponsorships will cover it. The bank is pushing hard. That loan can't be delayed anymore." Zoe gave a soft laugh. "You scared? Your mom is soft. She won't dare make a scene. And besides, the check is already prepared." I leaned lightly against the cold wall behind me. In that moment, I didn't feel angry. I felt something more familiar. The disappointment of a man who had believed for too long that he understood his son. Jack lowered his voice even more. "We just need today to pass. After the ceremony, everything will be fine. Mom and Dad always take my side." That sentence erased whatever doubt I had left, not because of the money, but because of the way he spoke about his own mother. Like a predictable factor, something to be used. I walked away before they opened the door. I didn't want my eyes to give away what I had just heard. I needed to hold on to that calm a little longer. Out on the balcony, the fog from Puget Sound was slowly lifting. Morning light slipped through the old stone columns, falling onto carefully arranged bouquets. Everything looked perfect. So perfect it felt fake. I wondered when in my life I had confused silence with consent. I thought back to when Jack was young. The months I spent offshore, Nancy handling everything alone. The times I tried to make up for it by signing checks, believing that was a father's responsibility. I taught my son how to calculate, how to assess risk. But I never taught him how to stop. A staff member passed by and bowed slightly. I returned the gesture with a nod. No one knew that just a few rooms away, an invisible line had been crossed. I went back to the bedroom. Nancy was still lying there, turned toward the window. The smooth curve of her bare head was softened by the light. It wasn't as frightening as before. But the hurt didn't disappear with the sunlight. I didn't wake her. I just stood there for a few minutes, to remind myself why I needed to stay steady. In my pocket, the small camera was still there. I took it out and placed it on the table. Such a small object, yet enough to expose an entire way of thinking. I didn't turn it on again. I didn't need to. What I had heard was enough to know this wasn't impulsive. It wasn't careless. It was a decision that had been weighed and accepted by my own son. I left the room again, this time with clearer intent. I went down to the reception area, where familiar faces were starting to gather, low chatter, polite laughter. I heard someone mention a dream wedding. Such a beautiful story. I didn't stop to correct them. In my mind, one question kept repeating, if I speak up right now. Who am I really protecting, Nancy? Or just my own pride? I understood something clearly. For Zoe, attention was the goal. For Jack, money was the escape. And for me, the only thing left to protect was the dignity of the woman who had walked beside me her entire life. I returned to the room and picked up my phone. Some calls don't need many words. I called our family lawyer, the same man who had been with us since Jack was in high school. I said only one sentence. Cancel the old plan. I need a different option. Today. He didn't ask why. He just said, I understand. When I hung up, my breathing steadied. Not because everything was solved, but because I had stopped pretending. Outside, test music began to play, signaling the ceremony was approaching. I stood still for a few seconds and listened. Then I looked back at the bedroom one last time, at Nancy resting there, separated from the stage others had built using her pain. I knew from that moment on I was no longer standing in the role of a father, hoping his child would come to his senses. I was preparing to step into the role I should have chosen long ago, the final guardian of the truth, even if the price was breaking everything they believed I would protect. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and stood still for a long moment, not to hesitate, but to check myself. I've lived long enough to know this. The most important decisions are usually made in silence. No noise, no anger, just a cold, steady clarity. I went back into the bedroom. Nancy was awake. She was sitting against the headboard, hands neatly folded on the blanket, her eyes fixed on the empty space in front of her. When she saw me, she didn't ask anything. We've been together long enough to know that sometimes answers come before questions. I won't let them turn this into entertainment, I said. My voice was low and even. But today, you need to trust me. Nancy nodded just slightly. She didn't look weak. She didn't try to look strong. It was a tired acceptance. I understood then. What she needed wasn't comfort. It was the feeling of standing at the center of her own life again. I opened the closet and took out the small wooden box I always bring to formal events. Inside was a Hermes silk scarf I bought years ago during a long business trip. I'd never found a reason to take it out. Until now. The color was subdued. The pattern classic. Nothing flashy. I wrapped the scarf around Nancy's head, carefully, slowly, like a ritual. It didn't hide anything. It simply restored order. When I stepped back, Nancy looked at herself in the mirror, not to search for what was lost, but to meet the new image. She exhaled, long, deep. I'm okay, she said. This time, I believed her. I stepped out and closed the door. The next part didn't require emotion. It required precision. I went straight down to the side hall, where phone reception was strongest, and called the bank. The voice on the other end was familiar. We'd worked together for more than 20 years. I need to stop the transfer, I said. Immediately. There was no surprise in his voice, just a brief pause. Then I'll take care of it. I didn't explain. There was no need. Years as an engineer taught me this. Systems need clear commands, not feelings. The next call was to the lawyer. This time I spoke more slowly, more carefully, not because I doubted him, but because this was a step I wouldn't allow to fail. I asked him to draft a new agreement. All the money intended as a wedding gift would be placed into a trust, in Nancy's name. No joint ownership, no open clauses, one controller only, and it wouldn't be me. When I ended the call, I checked the time, less than 2 hours before the ceremony. Enough to finish what mattered, not enough to change the nature of the people on the other side. As I walked back, I felt the atmosphere in the mansion had shifted, not just pre-ceremony busyness, but a strange, eager energy. I noticed unfamiliar faces holding equipment stationed at corners of the hall. Their eyes weren't searching for anything sacred. They were waiting for moments to capture. I understood. Zoe wasn't waiting for the ceremony to get attention. She was turning the entire day into a stage. A technician walked past and accidentally dropped his badge. I bent down and picked it up for him. It wasn't the logo of the event company. It was the name of an online media channel. I handed it back without a word. Another piece quietly slid into place. I stepped onto the balcony and looked down at the garden. Cameras hidden behind large planters. Cables running along the paths covered by rugs. Everything legal. Permitted. Approved. By the bride and groom. No one asked Nancy. I went back to the bedroom to warn her that once we stepped out there would be many eyes on her. Nancy listened without changing her expression. She asked only one question. Are you sure? I nodded. I've never been more sure. We walked out together, not rushed, not avoiding anything. I felt the weight of the looks around us, the curiosity held just beneath the surface. The silk scarf on Nancy's head didn't make her smaller. If anything, it made the silence around us heavier. Zoe stood at the far end of the hall, phone in hand, speaking to a camera. When she saw us, she froze for a brief moment, then smiled. A professional smile, well practiced. Jack stood beside her. His eyes flicked toward Nancy, then away. No surprise, no remorse, just tension poorly hidden. I didn't greet them. I didn't accuse them. I simply led Nancy to the front row where she should have been from the beginning, as the mother of the groom. When we sat down, the test music played again. Lights were adjusted. Everything was ready for the ceremony they believed was under control. They didn't know that in silence the financial doors had already closed. They didn't know that the images they planned to sell for attention were about to be placed into a very different context. I sat upright, hands resting on my knees, looking toward the aisle. Not as a father there to give blessings, but as a man who had prepared the only weapon he needed, the truth, at the right moment, and impossible to reverse. The ceremony began right on time. The music played at just the right level. Not too formal, not too loud. The fog over the bay had fully lifted, revealing water as still as a wide mirror. I sat beside Nancy and felt her breathing, slow, even, as if she were reminding herself that she was still here, still in control of her body and her own story. Zoe entered the aisle to prearranged applause. She walked slowly, turning slightly so the cameras could catch every angle. Jack followed behind her, adjusting his tie. His eyes swept past the front row and paused just briefly on Nancy. I didn't see confusion there, only a calculation still in progress. The officiant spoke familiar words about love and new beginnings. I heard them, but I didn't hold on to them. Each sentence passed like background noise for something else drawing closer. I saw Zoe glance toward the filming crew and give a subtle signal. Lenses adjusted. Lights shifted tone. When it was time for gifts and speeches, Zoe stepped forward. She held up her phone, smiling at the millions watching on the other side of the screen. I knew that smile. It was designed to touch no one directly and pull everyone in. "Thank you all for being here," Zoe said, her voice light and clear. "Today isn't just our wedding day. It's a special moment for our family." She turned toward me, her eyes waiting. Jack stood beside her, leaning slightly in my direction. A wordless reminder. I stood up. In that moment, the air in the room changed, not because I spoke, but because I didn't. The silence stretched beyond politeness. I felt hundreds of eyes on me. Nancy gently took my hand. Not to stop me, just to confirm she was still there. "I'll be brief," I said into the microphone. My voice didn't shake. "Today, I was asked to give a gift." Zoe's smile widened. She tilted her phone slightly to frame the shot. Jack exhaled as if everything was following the script. "However," I continued, "before I do that, I think everyone here and those watching online should know what that gift was truly paid for." A murmur spread through the room. I signaled the technicians. The stage lights softened. The screen behind us lit up. I didn't look at it right away. I looked at Nancy first. She nodded very slightly. Enough for me to go on. The first clip appeared. No music, no dramatic editing. Just raw footage from the small camera in the bedroom. The moment the door opened. A shadow moving in. The sound of clippers turning on. It happened quickly, coldly, without explanation. It didn't need one. In the room, some people turned away. Others covered their mouths. On Zoe's phone, screen comments flooded in too fast to read. Her smile froze, but her hand still held the phone steady. I said nothing. I let the images do the work. The screen changed. The next recording played. No video, just sound. Jack's voice. Painfully familiar. "If the clip goes viral, it's worth it. Mom is always soft. The check is already prepared. No names were needed. No further explanation." Those words found their place on their own. Jack took half a step forward, then stopped. Zoe turned toward me, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The cameras, once her allies, turned back on them. No signal, no command. Just the natural shift of attention when it changes direction. I took the microphone again. "I'm not standing here to humiliate anyone," I said slowly. "I'm standing here to close a story that went too far." I pulled an envelope from my jacket pocket. Not thick. No check inside. "The gift I prepared," I continued, "has been redirected. It is not for people who treat another person's pain as a tool." Zoe shook her head and forced a laugh. "You can't," she began, then stopped, when she saw the faces in the seats below were no longer on her side. "I can," I said, "and I already have. I turned to Jack. "My son," I said, not raising my voice, "you chose to see your parents' silence as a guarantee. Today I withdraw that guarantee." There was no reply, only the growing noise of the room. A few people stood up. Near the entrance I noticed faces that didn't belong to the ceremony. They didn't need introductions. Jack saw them too. His shoulders stiffened. I set the microphone down. Nothing more was needed. What had to be revealed was already there, clearer than any accusation. I turned to Nancy. "Let's go," I said. She stood with me. Not rushed, not bowed. The silk scarf on her head caught the light, forming a quiet outline amid the chaos spreading behind us. We walked down the aisle together. I heard my name called. Explanations. Arguments. I didn't turn back. Not out of contempt, but because some moments, turning back only stretches something that has already ended. Outside, a soft breeze rose from the bay. The fog was completely gone. I took a deep breath. For the first time that day, the air filled my lungs completely. Behind us, the ceremony continued in its own way, interrupted, questioned, and no longer owned by a single stage. For us, the door had closed. No noise, no retaliation. Just the truth, placed exactly where it belonged. Under the lights they had turned on themselves. We left the mansion once the sun had climbed higher, its light reflecting off Puget Sound like a long, quiet ribbon of silver. I heard nothing but our footsteps on the gravel path, and the soft wind moving through the trees. Behind us, the ceremony was still there, with unanswered questions and shifting stares. I didn't need to know how it ended. For me, the moment we stepped through that door was already a full stop. In the car, Nancy sat quietly looking out the window. I didn't ask how she felt. I've learned that some emotions need time to arrange themselves without being named right away. I simply placed my hand over hers, firm enough for her to know I was still there. When we got home, I made tea. An old habit, simple. Nancy removed the silk scarf and folded it neatly on the table. She looked at herself in the living room mirror longer than usual. I stood behind her, not stepping into that image. When she turned back, her eyes were no longer lost. Not happy, but steady. "I didn't think I'd feel this light," she said after a moment. Not to explain, just to acknowledge it. The days that followed moved slowly. There were no calls asking for forgiveness, no convincing explanations. I didn't expect any. I spent time walking with Nancy around the neighborhood where the trees were beginning to change color. She started going out without a hat, not because she forgot, but because she no longer felt the need to hide. One afternoon, as we sat on a bench overlooking the bay, Nancy said, "I don't want this story to end in silence." I understood what she meant. Not telling it to the world, but doing something so it wouldn't happen to someone else. We began to look into it. Quietly, without rush. I spoke with people who had worked in social services. Nancy talked with former colleagues. We listened more than we spoke. Some stories were heavier than ours, but they all shared one thing in common. Silence stretched out too long, out of fear of breaking the family. 1 year later, in a small house near downtown Seattle, we opened a support center for older adults who had been harmed within their own families. No large sign, no grand opening. Just a door open during the day, a tea table and chairs comfortable enough for people to sit down and say what they'd held inside for too long. Nancy let her hair grow naturally. She cut it short, neat. The new style made her look different, but not unfamiliar. It felt like a version of herself that no longer asked for permission. When someone looked at her with curiosity, she simply smiled. No explanations, no defenses. I no longer follow Jack and Zoe's lives. Not out of bitterness, but because I understand my boundaries. Some doors, when closed at the right time, don't need guarding from the outside. One late afternoon when the center was quiet, Nancy asked me, "Do you regret it?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "I only wish I'd done it sooner." I turned now to the lens, not of a camera, but of memory. If someone is listening to this story, I want them to understand one simple thing. Loving your children does not mean unconditional surrender. Sacrifice should never become a habit others exploit. And silence, when it lasts too long, is no longer compassion. It becomes complicity. I've learned that sometimes, to preserve the last bit of dignity for the person you love, you have to be brave enough to close a relationship that has turned toxic, not to punish, but to protect what remains human. As the sun set over the bay, Nancy placed her hand on my shoulder. We sat there without saying anything more. No need for a grand ending, just peace arriving at the right time after everything had been exposed. And for me, that was an ending good enough. If you stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you for listening with patience and understanding. If it gave you something to think about, please like, subscribe, and share, so stories like this can reach others who may need to be heard. Thank you for being here. I wish you and your family respect, peace, and dignity in every choice you make.